Anybody has any questions along the way, just put your hand up and don't. If you have questions from William Duncan, that can come in too, because I'm going to kind of transition from William to Charles. Yeah, just any time, because I like it to be a conversation as much as me doing a spiel, right?
Can I just ask you, so Charles Purdom,
Right.
was this later on? I mean, I remember that he wrote that book, right? Charles
He wrote 20 books, about 5 books on Baba.
Okay.
He met Baba, he was one of the 1931 group
Okay.
in Devon,
So it was Duncan, right? Or no?
no, 1933.
Oh, okay.
William met Duncan in London at Kitty's house in 1933.
Okay.
But Charles went to Meredith Starr's retreat in Chalicone, and Meredith said, why don't you, he was there just for rest and relaxation. He didn't know about Baba coming.
Oh.
And Meredith said, why don't you stay an extra week, because the spiritual master's coming from England. So Charles did, and that was the beginning.
I see.
So he was, and he wrote 2 biographies about Baba, 1937, The Perfect Master, and then 1964, The God Man. So it was more or less an update of those years after 1937, plus Charles's interpretation of what Baba was trying to do for us, or tell us in the God Man. On the back of Divine Drama, I'll just read it because it's not long. If we ask why there is a God in creation, why we exist at all, the answer is love. Creation is the play of love. So I put that on there not knowing why, but in the last 6 months I came across a quote by Baba that said, the purpose of creation is to love the beloved. So we're the top, we're the end result of creation, of evolution, right? So our purpose is to love the beloved. So. And that's why we love creation. Anyway, who's heard this quote, this other quote by Baba, which is fascinating? When he said, the Westerners are hard nuts to crack.
The Westerners?
The Westerners are hard nuts to crack, Baba said.
Yes.
Okay.
I can see that.
I'm pretty sure the biggest nut to crack for Baba was Charles Purdom. Okay? The biggest nut for Baba to crack was Mr. Purdom.
Is this before you wrote the book or after you wrote the book?
Charles came to Baba as a hard nut to crack. And in 1962, I'm jumping ahead, but in 1962 at the East-West Gathering, Baba said to Charles, give it up. Give it up, Charles. He said, give this up. Take everything into your heart. Stop using your head. You're too old now. He died within 3 years after the 62 gathering. Charles died in 65, 4 years before Papa. And even this is 54, this photo at the 3 Incredible Weeks, but Charles was sick for the last 10 years of his life.
Oh.
So, and I am jumping ahead, but he had 3, his work ethic was unbelievable. He had 3 books in 1964, The God Man, a book on Shakespeare, and a book on the utopian communities that he helped found in England. They were all published before he died. He was working on 3 books at the same time. Can you imagine? Mm-hmm. And he wrote 20 books and died a pauper. He died a pauper.
He died what?
A pauper.
A pauper.
Or broke, no money. The American and English Baba lovers had to help pay for the printing of the God Man, because Charles couldn't it was almost like a self-publishing effort, but, and he thought book sales would alleviate that, but he died in less than a year after The God Man was published. Anyway, many books about Mir Baba have appeared in recent months and over the past 80 years. Authors immerse themselves in their subjects, as Heather Nadell did with Mani, David Fenster did in tracking Mir's totally dedicated life of Baba. While our main subject is Baba, and the main objective is to get closer to Baba in the writing process, another unfoldment, perhaps infoldment, takes place in the unwinding of these Baba-related individuals. In the immersion, we actually take on the personas of these Baba co-stars, like Devana and her current Marriage Project, David and Corchez, Shelley's work on the life of Dr. Gohir. These books are coming, right? The Marriage book, the Dr. Gohir book, these are in the works. And, of course, in the unfolding biographies of William Dalkin and Charles Purdom. And I didn't even know in starting that that I would become so close to William Dalkin and so close to Charles Purdom, and they're so different. So it was, you know, it was kind of it wasn't a Frankenstein thing or a Jekyll and Hyde thing, but I had to change. You know, I just became so devoted to William, and I hated for the book to end. I really did, and I want to write about him again. And that's why I wanted Nick here, but I just talked to him about, because he had a question about the end of William's life, and William did have a complete manuscript that only Baba knew about, and Sheila Kachuri Fenster was the only other person, but Baba and William knew about, he finished a manuscript that has disappeared, right? Now, he was shopping it around, taking it to publishers in England, I think, in the 60s. So David Fenster, I said to David, if you ever find this manuscript, I'll be in India in 5 seconds. So David knows that, but it could have gone to one of 10 publishers in London when William went home in the 60s, and it could still be there in the catacombs of some publishing company. So it's another hilarity.
I seem to remember that he lost not one but 2 sons.
Right.
So seeing the pain from a Baba perspective, my question to you is, was he able to surrender to the pain of losing 2 young sons that he loved? Was he able to accept it as Baba's wish?
It had to be the case. It had to be the case. Because Ronan, the first son, died in a bicycle accident when he was working on The Perfect Master. And Charles actually took that case to court and tried to prove negligence on the part of a truck driver. But what happened was Ronan was bicycling in the village he was working in, and he came down. There was a parked bus and a truck coming towards him, and he tried to go between the two. And it didn't, and he fell off under the wheels of the truck. So there was a trial. There was a negligence trial, which Charles tried to get. He accepted the verdict, and they did not blame the truck driver, because Ronan should never try to go between, you know, he was coming down a hill, and he just said, I can make it through there, and he didn't. And within a year to the week, his other son died he had medical problems, but these are his two boys, right? These are his two boys, and they're gone, and, you know, I mentioned a little bit, I may have a little bit more on that, but anyway, when I look back, Baba and William Duncan totally pampered me as a pencil pusher for Slave of Love, because that's what I was. I just, whenever I got out of the way, the book felt better, what was coming out, if I wasn't there, you know, Bob Mossman. There were many high points. On one occasion, standing for a moment away from the desk in the writing shed, which I have a 10 foot by 6 foot writing shed that I built at home, with only a boat stove for heat in the winter. One of Baba's treasured gifts came through during the final writing process. In dismay, I stood up. I was on the final draft, I think, and I just stood up and I backed away from the desk and I said, I did not write this. I did not write this. You know, because it was just a beautiful passage, and I've had so many, there's been so many beautiful compliments about the Slave of Love, which I really appreciate. But I try to give them all to Baba, because I said, Baba and William wrote this, right? I didn't even feel that I ever it was only about 3 sentences, but it just struck my heart, you know? So I learned pretty quickly to give the credit to, and the blame if it wasn't going well to Baba. Anyway, I said, Baba and William wrote this. The moving passage was beyond anything I could ever relate to, you know, so. And those gifts come often enough to keep the process going, you know. Anyway, any questions? William the avid climber, William Duncan, carried me to the mountaintops in mapping out his dedicated life with Baba. Charles B. Purdom in Divine Drama is a completely different story from William Duncan. Still, so much dedication, but also struggle and very gnawing heartache, as Valeria said about the two boys. I couldn't believe it. I did not know that when I started writing Divine Drama, that he lost his 2 sons. When I hit that, and he was in the middle of doing The Perfect Master, I just said, how could he keep on? His wife, Antonia, ran to the church, right? And Charles just kept writing, and Charles grew up in not a Catholic church, but almost a Church of England. And but his wife had the Catholic Church to rely on when she lost her 2 boys. But I don't know how they survived, really. Anyway, at the end of completing Divine Drama, Baba and Charles had me pinned to the wall. You know, Jane doesn't always like me to. It was a complaint at the time. And she said, you know, you shouldn't say those things, but in the final weeks of that book, I felt like I was crawling around on the floor, because it was crawling on the floor, because Charles's life, as Valeria said, was not William Duncan's life. William Duncan had an allowance every month from his mother, his whole life in Indies, every month. Money came for William. And Charles Purdom had trouble feeding the family often, many times. Anyway, hindsight is wonderful, but the final job of putting the Purdom book to bed completely blithered me out, for want of another word. Even on press day, the markup pages arrived from the private courier for the final look-see by me. And just as they were about to start the press, a quick page review discovered what? The page numbers were messed up. Now this is complicated, because the book's on the printing press in Winnipeg. I'm at home. Jane has just arrived on her first visit to me in Nova Scotia. Ugh, and I just said, Jane had just arrived the night before and suddenly witnessed my panic. You probably remember, do you?
Yeah, you're pretty calm considering.
And it was only by accident, because I was going like this, because Jane had just arrived. I said, and we looked over 5 times already. But what happened, this is unusual, but your preface and your acknowledgments and your foreword are often in Roman numerals, and then page 1 of the Charles Purdom story is page 1, which might be 20 Roman numeral pages in. The computer decided in the final go, what are these Roman numerals? We'll start at page 1 at the publisher's page. So the whole index was off, because I had used, So I said, it was kind of cute. I guess you said I didn't panic, but I said, Jane, I need 2 hours. I need 2 hours, and that will do it. And it was like, I had to call the book designer. I had to say, what the hell happened? And she said, my God, what did happen? And I said, they're going to press the green button for 300 copies in about 15 minutes. So she got on the phone to Winnipeg. The book was being printed in Manitoba. And still, I have a great printer out there. And she called back and said it was my fault. She said, I thought when I sent the pages to the printing company that we were all right, but somehow in that transition, the computer decided to change the page number. So it's just a technical thing, but it's part of the aggravation anyway. Sound like fun? Any questions? Yeah, we survived. It only took about 2 hours. It was, am I wrong? I think it was Kitty's birthday.
It was Kitty's birthday.
It was Kitty's birthday the day. Oh.
It's neat how when these kind of fiascos occur, and if not checked, would have been a major fiasco.
Oh, I would have been done for.
Right, but in some way we were learning on the 11th hour or more that, hey, something has to be done.
Because I was looking at
Yeah.
pictures and captions and what I read some of the captions under the pictures to make sure, as I said, the 5th time we're going, at least 4 or 5 times before it came on. And you're always going to have mistakes, no matter. I knew from the newspaper business, a daily newspaper had 8 million possibilities for a mistake. So I knew that they were possible in these books too. Anyway, Charles Purdom's life was extremely tough. He stopped being a journalist at age 60 to become a full-time author. With that decision, the paid checks stopped. He had been a journalist, he had been paid, he'd put groceries on the table every week, but no more regular paychecks ever for Charles again. And the ability to look after his family became continually compromised. Continually. And he's trying to be dedicated to Baba. He loves Shakespeare. He's writing Shakespeare books. He loves Shakespeare as much as he loved Baba. In the beginning, I think near the end it was more Baba, but he was very much in love with Shakespeare. Materially, William Duncan grew up in a very different privileged circumstances. And that privilege extended completely through his adult life. Throughout his years in India, as I said, he received a regular allowance from his mother, and his father was completely, the pressure that William felt was from his dad. His father did not want him to be in India. But his mother, mothers and sons, as opposed to, that's why she kept sending them money, but everybody thought William was just working for a private hospital, a good charitable hospital. They didn't know much about Mir Baba. Because I think William's enthusiasm, he shared that with the family in the beginning, and the blowback made him stop. Because it's too much. It was just too much for his father. He wanted him to come home and be a successful neurosurgeon in London, right? And not be. Anyway. When William died in August 1969, just months after Baba, his financial worth was £66,000. A lot of money. In 2018, that would translate into £1 million, or 1.3 million US. Just, I'll make it short, it's a much longer story, but right away, everyone in India thought that money should go to India. To the point that Adi Jr. went to William's twin sister and her husband in London and pleaded all afternoon and said, William really wants that money to go to Baba, not to the family. But what happened was William's will named Baba as the beneficiary of his fortune. Baba died beforehand, unfortunately, made that will null and void. If the trust had been more established, probably within 5 years, they would have had a case. But they didn't fight, but they argued with the family for probably 6-8 months. And Adi Sr. finally said, we can't do this anymore. It was getting kind of greedy or something. So they gave up that fortune and the family got it all. But William's will, he left 200 pounds to every niece and nephew and named them in his will. And he loved his nieces and nephews like the children he didn't have, right? And they loved him so dearly. Anyway, Charles Purdom's early and adult life, if you've read the book, you'll find out his childhood. It was like a bleak Dickens novel. As soon as I read about his childhood, he had to drop out of grade 8 to help support his mom and dad, himself, and work at a grocery store. And he cried because he couldn't be out playing with the other boys, right? But he worked all day Saturday and after school. Dropping out of school in grade 8, his single efforts and accomplishments exceeded many others in similar circumstances. I think you hear that term self-made man. Charles was a self-made man. He dropped out of grade 8. He's described in Baba literature as a scholar. Well, he's only a scholar, he's a self-made scholar. Because he took all the philosophy books, all the Shakespeare books, and went off into the hills of England and hid away and read everything he could in his late teens. He would hide out in a reclusive situation and just devour all that literature. So that's how he got to be a scholar, really. Struggle is one word that repeats itself page after page in divine drama. And it literally, I'll stop complaining, but it did wear me down. It wore me down a little bit. Does anyone want to comment or interject, please?
You didn't go to college or
No,
you never did?
no courses, no nothing, no courses. But we know Shakespeare's plays are that's just Baba's. That's what we're living with, Baba, Shakespeare's plays.
Now, what I have found interesting in my reading the two books, his book on Baba and Kitty Davis' book, Love Alone Prevails.
Right.
Is the two different outlooks. They are looking at the same God-man, the same avatar. They move with him, they spend time with him. And the masculine view is like a very serious witness of Baba's, not only his life, but his essence.
Right.
Kitty is so lovely because it's feminine. It's full of episodes of feelings and contrasts and plus, anecdotes of their life together. So I would greatly recommend to read the two books simultaneously, to have the two people who have known Baba directly and who have looked at him,
Right.
and they've written a first-hand impressions. One a man and one a woman, both loving. One very much in the heart, Kitty.
Of course.
And Charles, of course, was a man of
Intellect, yeah.
yes, and his heart was touched many times. In fact, it broke open with the death of the two sons. So this is all I want to say. It's a personal comment about the two personalities who wrote the two different books.
Well, going from William, it was pure heart, pure, I say Gaga love story, William Duncan and Baba. And then the intellectual journey with Charles and Divine Drama. I'll just say this a little bit of an aside because Dana Ferry, who's a friend, she was rereading Ramju's diaries right after this was published. And she said, have you read that? I said, yeah, 30 years ago I read it. And Sobs and Throbs, do you remember? I said, yeah, I remember Sobs and Throbs. And so when I got home, I used to stop in and stay with Dana, coming and going from Nova Scotia to Myrtle Beach. And I got home, and I said I should read that book again. I always take a prompt from somebody, if it's a tap on the shoulder.
Right.
So I read it again, and I came across Sobs and Throbs, and the boys weeping in their love for Baba. And I said, I have to go there. That's the Prem Ashram. That's why this is happening. I have to go with these boys after Charles because I have to, my heart, I felt Charles took my heart away a little bit just because of his grind, you know, so, anyway. Now, I know Kitty's book was loving and Charles' book was probably more loving of Baba, but our William's book, William's life. But Charles, when I started to get into his work with the God Man, which has influenced a lot of Baba people, right? I started to realize how hard he worked for us. If you've read the God Man, it was all done for Westerners. All done for what Charles was trying his best to interpret Baba for the Westerners, right? And he didn't want blind, sentimental devotion by the Easterners. He wanted to be able to intellectually explain it to us, and you know that was his. The letters between him and Max and Gazela Hayflager. I mean, it's all about. Avatar was the hardest concept he ever faced, and even I had never heard the term Avatar until I heard about Baba, you know. So Charles had to struggle with Avatar. He had conversations with Baba about that term, and you know, I think he finally understood it. So. Anyway, main point in his life is that he was working so hard for us. The Western reader, the Western Baba lover. Don't ever forget that part. And one of his biggest intellectual hurdles was grasping, as I said, the concept of Avatar, and then to present it to us as understandably as he could. You know, I appreciated that he did that. Unlike William Duncan, Charles' relationship with Baba was in no way a Gaga love story. We are truly gifted to have Charles' revealing autobiography, Life Over Again, to draw on. This is a beautiful part. This is one of the petals, not a pebble. I started to write Divine Drama, and original Charles Purdom books, hardcovers, started to arrive at my door without any explanation in the post, which I needed for research. His autobiography came, where from? I didn't know. Another Shakespeare book came, and I didn't know I still don't know where they came from. It was like Baba sending these books in the mail, and I needed them desperately, because you can't find, it's very hard to find Life Over Again. I'm about to give them to the Mir Center Library so that they have them. These are what keep you going, because I'm alone in Nova Scotia, and And I get this thing in my mailbox, I don't know what it is, I get on the post office and I said, here's Charles' autobiography. And I couldn't find it on Amazon, used or anything, and I needed it, because it's so, you know, and that was written in the early 50s, you know, Life Over Again. It's a beautiful autobiography.
That's wonderfully astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, and in that, this was 20 years after he met Baba, so 31. It was written in 51, and this is all mentioned in Divine Drama. And this is a setback, because Charles says, Mir Baba is one of my 3 best friends. And at that point, Mir Baba meant a little bit more to me, right? So I said, Charles, and, you know, the minister that married him, and a philosopher, a friend, and Mir Baba. They were all, and I said, oh God, you know, after writing Baba's first biography, which came before Avatar, The Perfect Master was 1937, and Gene Adrio's book was 47, I think. He's still just saying Baba's one of my 3 best friends. Anyway, I wanted him to feel, but it was almost like he wasn't letting the love come in because he was still using his head so much, right? So, any questions? Anyway, there was very, as a new author, I was drawn to Charles's life. We shared a work history in journalism. His output of producing 20 books was very admirable. But I did not know well, as I said before, well into the book, halfway through the book, more than that he died a pauper. I didn't even know that. I thought he probably made pretty good money for writing 20 books. He made nothing. He made nothing. So, there's little of Charles's life that was not a struggle. Everyone's life is Baba, perhaps. And as we touched on before, they lost their oldest son in the middle of writing The Perfect Master, and then the second son died suddenly a year later, the year the first biography of Baba was published, The Perfect Master. Charles B. Purdom had more inner strength than many other Baba followers of that day. He was 10 years older than Baba, which I didn't grasp that until, you know, he was born 10 years before Baba. So. And the self-made man was extremely stubborn and rarely compromised the credentials he fought to build throughout his life. For example, in reviewing the final manuscript of the 1955 Purdom book, God to Man and Man to God, Baba said to Charles, wonderful job, but I'd like you to make a few changes. And what did Charles say? That's not going to happen. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. The book might have been on the press like me, I don't know, but he said, you know, Charles, that's the relationship he had with Baba. He went to the East-West Gather in 1962. He went early, maybe 2 weeks early, and he stayed 1 or 2 weeks after everybody went home. And he had direct contact with Baba about the God-man, because he had a lot of questions about, and Baba was helping him write that book for us, right? So, anyway. Later in life, Charles did appear to mellow. Perhaps life just wore him down, for he lived very much in the world.
Do you know what those corrections?
Hmm?
And you know what those?
I don't know what the corrections were, Tom.
There's some inconsistencies between that and the discourses.
Yeah, this was kind of a quickie, pared down version of the discourses, right? And so I'm not sure, you know, there might have been some errors.
Just have comments. I really appreciate your vulnerability. It's like when I hear actors talk about how they inhabit a character, they feel their way of being, and the contrast of kind of how you felt their way of being, both kind of.
But I didn't know what was happening until I was into the books. I didn't know this was happening. And then I said, and I didn't want to let go of William. It broke my heart. And when that book was over. I just wanted to stay with him for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I really did. And I hope I get to be with William again, you know. And I may, you know, we'll see. Anyway, I think some of this was in the other talk I did give in Myrtle Beach, but you should, I keep stressing the family connections, and interesting to note that in asking Antoinette, Charles's granddaughter, who gave me so much help with this book, she lives in the south of France, and I asked her what she thought of her grandfather's relationship with Baba, and she very naturally said, Baba very much sustained our grandfather. And when she said that, she said it to me in an email, but when I met up with her and her three sisters in Geneva and spent 5 days with them, it was so beautiful. They all were in the same room, and they all exuded that same response, that they knew their grandfather, Charles, used to come to Geneva, take each teenage girl out, or 12-year-old or 10-year-old, separately to lunch to quiz them about current affairs. And they always said, oh my God, CB's coming. They call them CBs. CB's coming, my God, I got to start reading the newspaper, and they go, oh. But he wouldn't take them out as a group. He took them out to see how sharp they were. Right? So he was doing that for his grandchildren, right? And they loved him dearly, but they were mortified when they had to go to lunch with grandma.
Bob,
Yes.
one more thing. The first time I heard somebody speak directly about Donkin was from Shireen, Andy Jr.'s daughter, and
Right.
Franny. They knew him.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
So I wonder, have you ever connected with
I
Shireen
had a
and
little
Franny?
bit with Shireen, but she,
And Franny, she still has very
Franny's
good
in,
She's very old,
yeah.
very sharp.
I may get to that. Anyway. Antoinette's three sisters, as I said, were in the room with us in Geneva at the same time, and they all readily agreed, you know. It was kind of cute, you know, when I arrived in Geneva and stayed in Vanessa, the oldest sister's flat, but how many of them? 2 or 3. Some stayed down the street at a friend's house. But the first thing they said when I walked in was, "You're a Baba lover. Do you drink at all?" And I said, "I drink anything." They said, "Good." So then everybody ran out and got wine. It was lovely. And each sister competed against the other one to make me the best dinner in the 4 nights I was there. As I said, Jane has managed to equal the 4 sisters. In the lovely film created for Charles's 50th anniversary, death date in England, this was past September, which would have been 2/15, I think. Yeah, the book came off the press in 2/15 in time for this celebration in Welwyn Garden City, which Charles helped found this utopian community, which Ebenezer Howard was Charles' hero. And Ebenezer Howard inspired the utopian communities in the US of A. You know, he's that big a deal. Letchworth and Welwyn Garden City. And I couldn't go to the anniversary because I was just exhausted at that point. Anyway, they made a little film, I think it's on the website, it's on Oceanic Publishing website. And Nicole says lovely things about her grandfather's relationship with Baba. I really believe if Charles had had the privilege of living in Marizad for the last 20 years of his life, he would have been a beautiful Monterey member. He really would have been. But he didn't. You know, he had to keep food on the table and keep that family relationship going. That was not his karma. He was very loyal to Antonia and his family always. The letters and agonizing exchanges between the Purdoms and Hayflickers reflect disloyalty and Charles's struggles. And that's another beautiful point of the research. Verena, Max's and Gazila's daughter, sent me over like almost 200 original letters between her parents and Charles. Original letters. She sent them special delivery, and I knew where they were from. And I said, oh, and I just started going, and Charles's handwriting is atrocious. It's terrible. So, but if you just keep reading and reading, you get used to what this letter is, and I eventually, but I said, what do I do with them after? I said, I'll send them back. She said, give them to the archives in India, which I did. But I had to, and it wasn't something I could run copies of, because some were airgrams, some were all different onion skin paper, stationery. So I had to sort of be very careful with those. But that was another, that kind of thing kept me going, because then I had all of that research and the agonizing, question. Charles and Max would, like, we argue here sometimes, right? Or we argue on the telephone. Charles and Max would argue in letters, back and forth. So then he would stop writing to Max and write to Gazila until it cooled down with Max. So they'd have letters that were sort of making up, and you could sense, I'm not going to write Max right now because we just fought about Avatar or something, So it was so cute. It was like they were having a conversation, and letters were being written at the same time.
Who's Max?
Max Hayfliger, and the Hayfligers are a Swiss couple.
Yeah.
Mount, what's the name of the mountain that Ken Lux went to? He went Fallon.
Follow.
Anyway, they're very prominent Baba lovers. Did you meet Max? I think you did.
Once.
To the center. He came in '58, right? I think they came in '58 when Baba came to the center. They were very close, the Purdoms and the Hayfligers, because Charles and Antonia would go to Geneva, so they'd stop in Zurich to see and this became a very close two couples. Anyway, with Divine Drama, I felt that I had become Charles and wept with him in the final stages. Like when I found the love letter from William to Baba in the archives in 2010, I wept in the archives. But I was weeping for another reason with Charles, just because his life was so tough, So, looking back, it is surprisingly sweet to see similarities, actually. Ironic, I think, between Charles and William. They both knew Baba's game, right? They both knew Baba's game. Or perhaps more politely, his intentions for us. It is, Baba, he plays games with all of us. It's a very similar game, but it's the individual attention is worth it, I think. Charles knew that his small self or ego had to be reduced to ashes to bring his soul into the oversoul. He struggled daily to do this, and William struggled very much in his life in India with Baba to also achieve his own effacement or same thing. Exactly the same thing. Anyway. Any questions? Jean?
Was Edmund, the actor, related in any way?
Oh yes, son. Edmund was the son of Charles, the youngest son. I think already, after the two boys died, there was Barbara and Edmund. And Barbara, their daughter, was totally in love with Bob. For a time until she got married, and sometimes that changes things, right? So it did change things for her. But she was a student of Margaret Crass, Barbara Purdom. And then she went on to have her own ballet school in Geneva, right? Because of Margaret's training. I'm probably going, I'm way over to do, so. Just to wrap it up kind of quickly, I already said in 62 years working on 3 books, Shakespeare, Model Town Book, and The God Man. They were all published, including The God Man, I'll just, not to end on Shakespeare, but we all took Shakespeare, but when I got that book, What Happens in Shakespeare, in the mail, and I started reading it, I said, why didn't I have this book at school? It's so beautiful. But Charles is interpreting Shakespeare according to Baba. According to Baba. So I was putting in the margin all through What Happens in Shakespeare, I was putting B's, this is Baba, this is Baba. The antagonist, it was all the same agony that these people were going through in Shakespeare's plays that we go through every day with Baba. I don't want to paint a bleak picture because my life with Baba is mostly joy. Mostly joy. Don't think it isn't. Anyway, one final word on The God Man, such an important book for so many Baba followers over the years. Don't ever forget, Charles put his heart and soul into The God Man for us. If you read it again in the coming months, please remember his dedication to you. He wasn't writing it for the Indian audience. He was writing it for us. And his readers in the West. And if there's any final questions, I'm happy to respond, but, I just have a final line, but I've already done that. Charles was the hardest nut to crack. But Baba said, the Westerners are really hard nuts to crack because he was getting that devotion from India, right? He was getting that devotion. But the intellect in the West, he knew that he had to deal with it. But Charles, when he said at the East-West gathering, he said right to Charles, give it up, Charles, give it up. And he meant to stop. He wanted Charles to be in his heart in his final years. He knew Charles was sick, right? And Charles died, Charles died like less than a year after The God Man was published. And I think Baba wants us to give it up too. Give it up. Any final questions?
Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where did he die, Charles?
London.
In London, okay.
And it's in the diary when Charles died. Barbara, who had loved Baba, got to Charles's diary and threw away a lot of Charles's diary. It was too hot. It was too hot about the family and things like that. Because when the paparazzi wanted Edmund Purdom, they came banging on Charles's door and bothered, because he was a star, a pretty good star for 5 years in Hollywood. And he had married Tyrone Power's ex-wife, and they had to have an affair, and it drove the Purdom seniors crazy, the paparazzi. It's like, look what happens today with the paparazzi. Well, Edmund and luckily Edmund died a very happy man, I think, in Rome. I mean, I just missed him, 2007 in there somewhere. He lived, he gave up acting and became a sound engineer on movies like Moses, and but he never went back to Hollywood.
This was his son.
Yeah. I love doing that. And I miss Barbara too. I just, when I started doing this, both Purdom children had died within 5 years, just before that. But I got a lot from his grandchildren about their parents. And, thanks a lot, Jay.
Thank you.